This is problem number 15 for section 3.3. In this problem it says, find the first and second derivatives of the function. And they give you w equals 8z squared e to the z. So we're going to need to use the product rule here. And we're also going to need to pull back out our derivatives of our exponential with base e. So we're going to call this u, this v, for this problem here. And we're going to say that dw over dz, which means the derivative of the w function with respect to this independent variable z, is going to equal, let's go ahead and write out u prime, v, and v prime. So u is 8z squared. V is e to the z. When I take the derivative of this, I end up with 16z. When I take the derivative of e to the z, well, I know the derivative of e to the x is just e to the x, so this is just e to the z. Now I can use the product rule, so u prime, which is 16z, times our v, which is e to the z, plus v prime, which is e to the z, times u, which is 8z squared. When I combine those together, I end up with 16z e to the z, plus, this will be 8z squared e to the z. Now we're going to go through and we're going to find the second derivative. So instead of just one product rule now, we have to do two product rules. So let's go ahead and write this out. This will be the second derivative of w with respect to z, so d squared w dz squared, equals, we got to name these, so we're going to call this, let's call this u1, and we'll call this v1, and we'll call this u2 and v2. So we'll say that u1 prime, v1, and v1 prime is going to be here, and I'll say u2 prime, and then v2 prime. Now you can use different letters. I just decided to use the subscripts to figure this out. Let's start with 16z, so this is 16z. This is e to the z. So this will be just 16 here, and this will be e to the z when we take the derivative. For the second part, we have 8z squared. So this will be 16z. And then we have e to the z here, which will also be just e to the z. All right. Let's go ahead and write all this out. So we end up with, for the first part, we're going to get, obviously, the product rule here. And we might not have a ton of room. I'll try and cram it in there. This is u prime, so 16, times v, which is e to the z. And then we have e to the z times 16z. So we have plus e to the z times 16z. And then we would have plus, let's go ahead and do the middle two times each other, because it doesn't really matter with the product rule, right? So it's u prime times v, so 16z times e to the z plus, and the outside 2, which will be 8z squared times e to the z. When we multiply those together, this is 16e to the z plus 16z e to the z plus 16z e to the z, and then we end up with plus 8 z squared e to the z. Looks like we can combine stuff in the middle, so we end up with 16 e to the z plus 32 z e to the z plus 8 z squared e to the z. So this should be our second derivative of that function. And you can see we had to use the product rule twice to get there.